We've been following for days. Out of Hadley, a man detained by the FBI back in court today for a hearing to decide whether or not he should stay behind bars while he faces his federal firearms charge. Western Mass News reporter Wesley Days live in studio for us tonight with details from federal court. And Wesley, we still don't have a decision from the judge.
We don't, Chris. Prosecutors and the defense spent several hours simply discussing the facts of this case, and I mean several. And it's been a winding case, I tell you. 43-year-old Jacob Miller may be facing a federal firearms charge, but the hearing didn't focus much on that charge today. In fact, the spotlight was on the hazardous materials found inside of his Hocknam Road home and the invoices that indicate he sold plutonium from his website called Collecting the Periodic Table. This all started last Tuesday when several FBI trucks showed up at his front door. The FBI found guns and bullets and black powder for small arms in a FedEx box. Not behind bars at first, Miller's there now after the state's Environmental Protection Department decided it flagged safety concerns over the amount of toxic substances he had in his home and a lie he allegedly told about not having mercury in his house. Now let's fast forward to today's hearing. It had both sides going back and forth about a myriad of issues about Miller. Prosecutors highlighted the suspect's previous cases, including a child pornography charge from over 20 years ago, 2 charges surrounding possession of an explosive device. They even brought up friends of Miller who told authorities about his past with explosives. Plus, an FBI agent took the stand. He also spoke about the amount of radioactive items found in Miller's basement. The defense, on the other hand, focused on the amount of plutonium sold online and the wide internet access to some of the items the state's Environmental Department was concerned about. When I got outside, though, Chris, I will tell you, we tried to speak with Charles Dolan. He's Miller's attorney. He declined our request for comment. I also tried to speak with Miller's parents. They also turned down our request. The hearing continues in federal court tomorrow, starting at 1 in the afternoon. Reporting live in studio, Wesley Days, Western Mass News.